Have you ever loved someone so deeply, only to lose them in the blink of an eye? Harold Pierce did, a successful CEO, a father, and once a husband until the day a tragic accident stole his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, and shattered everything he built his life around. Then, as if grief wasn't cruel enough, his late father's will forced him into an impossible choice: marry before his 50th birthday, or lose the foundation built in Lily's memory. Imagine being in his place, mourning a child, a broken marriage behind you, and now being told to love again or risk watching your daughter's dream vanish forever. What would you do? This is not a story about wealth. It's a story about quiet courage, unexpected hope, and the kind of love that doesn't shout but stays. So if you've ever wondered what it means to truly inherit someone's legacy, stay with us. If you find this story touching, comment 1. If you think this video needs improvement, comment 2. Now, let us take you to Charleston, South Carolina, where a man's greatest promise wasn't written in blood, but in belief. The morning light in Charleston, South Carolina, filtered through the tall windows of Harold Pierce's penthouse office. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and coffee gone cold. Outside, the city moved at its slow, Southern-pace carriages clattered down cobbled streets, and Spanish moss swayed from old oaks. Inside, Harold stood silent, holding a thick envelope in both hands. It had arrived that morning, delivered by a suited courier with polite eyes and nothing to say. The envelope was embossed with the golden seal of Whitmore and Gray, his late father's long-time law firm. He hadn't expected anything else from them. His father had been gone for over a year. The estate had been settled, or so he thought. But the letter inside changed everything. It was a formal document, precise in tone and format, and tucked neatly among the legal clauses was a line that made Harold's throat go dry. The estate and controlling shares of Pierce & Sons Construction will remain with Harold Pierce only if he is legally married before his 50th birthday. He read it twice, then again. The words didn't change. Behind him, a knock came. The door creaked open, and Miles Whitley, the family's longtime attorney, stepped inside with a look of quiet regret. "I thought it'd be better to bring it in person," he said, folding his hands in front of him. "Your father added that clause years ago, around the time you and Claire had Lily." Harold didn't turn to look at him. "So, let me get this straight," he said slowly. "I lose my daughter, my wife walks out on me, and now I have to go shopping for a wife to keep the damn company." His voice was low, sharp, not angry. "Exactly. But fraying." Miles didn't answer right away. "It's not about the company," he said. "It's about the foundation, the name. Your father wanted Pierce & Sons to remain in family hands with someone beside you to carry on the name." Harold finally turned. His eyes were darker than usual, the kind of tired that didn't come from lack of sleep. "She's not here to carry it," he said. "Lily's gone." Miles looked down, then back up. "You still have time. 14 months. It doesn't have to be perfect, Harold, just legal." He offered a sympathetic shrug, then quietly left, closing the door behind him. The office fell back into silence. Harold stood there for a long time, staring at the papers as if the ink might rearrange itself. Then he walked to the window, looked out over the city, and laughed softly under his breath, a hollow, bitter laugh. "I lost the only person I gave a damn about," he whispered, "and now you want me to replace her with a wedding ring?" The laugh died quickly. He sat down at his desk, still holding the papers. His hands had begun to shake slightly. He reached into the drawer for a bottle of bourbon, then stopped, closed it again. He hadn't had a drink in 11 months. The sunlight crept along the floor like time moving without permission. He stared at the framed photo on the corner of his desk. Lily, in her red raincoat, holding a paper flower she had made at school. Her front teeth were missing, her smile wide and proud. Next to her stood Claire, his ex-wife, one hand on Lily's shoulder. They both looked so alive in that picture. That had been taken 2 weeks before the accident. The frame tipped as he picked it up. He held it carefully, running a thumb across the glass. Then, after a moment, he turned it face down. That night, he went home and sat in the dark. No music, no television, just the sound of the grandfather clock ticking steadily in the hallway. The silence in his house had never been comfortable, but tonight it felt like it had claws. He opened his laptop, searched, legal marriage requirements, South Carolina. Can you marry for business reasons? Does marriage void inheritance clauses? He read for hours, but none of it told him what he really wanted to know. Could you ask someone to marry you not out of love, but because your dead father wrote a sentence on a page? Could you drag someone into the ruins of your life just to keep something you promised your daughter? He closed the laptop. The next day, he returned to the office. Everything looked the same, as always. The same morning paper, folded neatly, the same lukewarm coffee on his desk, the same silence. But as he sat down, his eyes drifted toward the outer desk. Mary Ellison had been his assistant for 5 years, quiet, organized, almost invisible. She came early, left late, never said too much, but she had never missed a day. Never once. She was already there, typing something softly. Her hair pulled back in its usual bun, her cardigan buttoned up to the collar. And for the first time in 5 years, Harold looked at her, not past her. Not through her, but at her. She hadn't changed much. A little older, tired, maybe, but calm. Still, present. She had seen everything his good years, the collapse, the funeral, the silence after, and yet she stayed. That evening, he found himself sitting at his desk long after the building emptied out, his hands folded, the document still in the envelope beside him. He picked it up, stared at it again. Married. Before 50. Not for love, not for companionship. For the foundation. For Lily. For a promise whispered in the backseat of a car 2 years ago. Daddy. When I grow up, I want to build a house for kids who don't have mommies or daddies. He had sworn to make that real. And now, because of a single sentence in his father's will, all of it could slip away unless he crossed a line he never thought he would. The clock on the wall ticked on. Outside, Charleston streets lit up with soft lamplight. The city moved on, but inside, Harold Pierce sat frozen somewhere between grief and obligation, between the man he was and the man Lily would have wanted him to be. Tomorrow, he would start the search. For what? He didn't know yet. A wife. A solution. A loophole. He looked toward Mary's desk again, now empty for the night. And a strange thought crossed his mind. Maybe what he was looking for had never really left. He hadn't gone into Lily's room since the accident. Somehow, after all this time, the door still creaked the same way. The walls still smelled faintly of the lavender sachets she used to hide in her dresser drawers. Her tiny bed sat untouched, covers neatly folded, as if she might run back in at any moment barefoot, laughing, dragging a stuffed rabbit by its ear. Harold stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, heart thudding louder than his footsteps. It had been 2 years, but the ache was fresh, familiar. Like a song you forgot you knew the words to, until it started playing again. He stepped inside, careful not to disturb anything. The books on her shelf were arranged in alphabetical order. She was meticulous about that. Her favorite was still there, its pages worn and cover bent. The Giving Tree. He picked it up, slowly, thumbed through the first few pages, then stopped when he saw the note. It was written in Lily's crooked handwriting. For Daddy, when I grow up, I want to help kids who don't have mommies or daddies. Maybe we can build them a house. It wasn't just a child's dream. It had been her heart. She spoke about it constantly over breakfast, during bedtime stories, even at the park. She used to draw pictures of orphanages with flower gardens, tiny beds with pink blankets, smiling children holding hands. Harold lowered the book, jaw tight. After she died, he couldn't look at those drawings. Claire had gathered them all into a folder and placed them in a drawer, away from sight, out of mercy, perhaps. Or maybe because the weight of those dreams was too much for her. 2. Claire had always handled grief differently. She folded inward, closing her heart like shutters before a storm. For a while, they tried to help each other counseling, quiet dinners, holding hands across empty spaces. But something had changed after the funeral. They stopped speaking, not in anger, but in silence that said everything. 3 months later, she moved out. She didn't ask for anything, no alimony, no division of assets, just space. Now, she lived in a cottage outside Asheville. He got a Christmas card from her last year. It said, "Thinking of Lily today. I hope you're well." He never wrote back. Harold sat down on the edge of Lily's bed. His shoulders slumped. The blanket was soft beneath his palms. He stared at the space on the wall where her growth chart had once been, little pen marks climbing higher every few months. The last one stopped at 43 inches, 7 years old. He closed his eyes. Some nights, he still heard her voice, in the back of the car, singing off-key, whispering jokes at the dinner table, asking, "Daddy, when I grow up, can I have a library instead of a wedding?" She never got to do any of those things. And he had stopped doing most things too. He hadn't dated since Claire. Not because he couldn't, but because the idea of letting someone in felt like a betrayal. As if loving someone new meant loving Lily less. The therapist he saw briefly after the accident once asked him, "Do you think Lily would want you to be alone forever?" He hadn't answered. He didn't know how. Standing now, Harold walked to the far corner of the room where a stack of art supplies still sat in a plastic bin, dried markers, glitter pens, scraps of colored paper. At the very bottom, folded neatly, was one of Lily's blueprints. She used to call them that her house designs for sad kids. This one had 4 bedrooms, a garden, and a room labeled "Quiet Hugs." He smiled, just barely. That was what sparked the idea for the Lily's Hope Foundation. Not at first. For months after her death, Harold did nothing. Work became a blur. Days bled into weeks. Then, one afternoon, he found that blueprint in his coat pocket. He didn't remember putting it there, but it felt like a sign. He called a friend in nonprofit law, started drafting plans, met with architects, educators. The goal was clear a network of transitional homes for children who had lost their parents' places filled with safety, routine, warmth, places Lily would have loved. The foundation was in its infancy, just a skeleton crew, a modest office space, and a few pledged donors. But it mattered. It gave Harold a reason to get up in the morning. Something to build not with steel beams and cranes, but with compassion. Still, some days, he questioned it all. Who was he to try to carry Lily's dreams when he'd failed to protect her? Could you honor someone's life without being crushed by the guilt of their death? Could you love again, even if your heart still had Lily's name etched into every part of it? He didn't know. But standing in her room, surrounded by paper flowers and scribbled floor plans, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let the foundation go. It was her voice, extended into the world. It was her love, made tangible. He had promised her on that hospital bed, when her hand was cold in his, that he would never let her be forgotten. Now, that promise had a deadline. 14 months. A marriage. A future tied to someone else's hand, and the question that clawed at him most was not whether he could find someone. It was whether he could let them in. The list was shorter than he thought it would be. Harold had sat at his kitchen table for nearly an hour that morning, pen in hand, staring at the blank notepad in front of him. The names didn't come easily. He wasn't looking for romance. He was looking for someone willing, someone trustworthy, someone who wouldn't laugh at the proposition or, worse, say yes for the wrong reasons. He jotted down 3 names and stopped. The first was a woman he hadn't seen in over a decade, Elizabeth Carter. They had dated in college. She had been the only woman he ever truly pictured growing old with before life carried them in different directions. The last he heard, she was living in Atlanta, running a bookstore, remarried. Still, he called. They met at a quiet cafe halfway between Charleston and her city. She looked exactly the same, graceful, bookish, a warmth in her smile that made the years disappear. For a brief moment, Harold allowed himself to imagine what it would have been like if he had stayed, if Lily had known her. Over chamomile tea, he explained everything. The clause, the foundation, the deadline. Elizabeth listened in silence. When he finished, she reached across the table, placed her hand gently on his. "You know," she said, 10 years ago, I might have said yes." She smiled, kind but firm. "But I have a husband now, a daughter in high school, and even if I didn't, you're not asking for a marriage. You're asking for a partner to carry a ghost." He nodded. It wasn't a rejection filled with pity. It was one filled with truth. The second name came from his own company. Candace Monroe, a partner at one of the legal firms Pierce & Sons frequently worked with. Smart, direct, efficient. They had worked on several projects together. She respected him. They met over lunch at a downtown restaurant. Harold explained the clause more carefully this time, less emotionally. He offered candor, transparency, even compensation. Candace folded her napkin slowly, then leaned forward. "So you want to marry me for optics," she said, "to save your board seat and keep the foundation going?" He didn't deny it. She raised an eyebrow. "What do I get?" He hesitated. "Security, structure, a partnership, a purpose." "If you want it?" Candace sipped her wine, then replied evenly. "I already have those, and I don't think adding Mrs. Pierce to my resume is worth explaining to the press every day." Before she left, she paused. "You're trying to buy loyalty." "Harold, that's not the same as love." He watched her walk out, her heels clicking like punctuation on a sentence he hadn't finished. The third was a wild card, Trina Blake, a high-profile PR strategist based in Charlotte. She'd worked with his company before during a brand crisis and had a way of making even a failing building project sound like an innovation. She was bold, charismatic, and always dressed like she had a photo shoot at any moment. They met in his office, sunlight flooding the glass conference room as she breezed in with a leather portfolio and a lipstick smile. "So," she said brightly, "you need a wife? Fast. I can spin that." He blinked. "You knew your legal team contacted my firm. Harold, please, if you're going to make a move like this, let me manage the rollout." He didn't know whether to laugh or be insulted. "I'm not hiring you to market the marriage," he said quietly. "I'm asking if you'd consider being part of it." She paused, the smile fading only slightly. "You're serious, yes?" Trina tapped her pen against the table, then leaned back. "Well, I won't lie. It would be iconic. Widow by contract, CEO by association, your image would be solid gold." He stared at her, searching for something, anything that hinted she had even read about Lily's Hope Foundation. She hadn't. The meeting ended shortly after. For days after, Harold didn't reach out to anyone else. He found himself sitting at home at night, surrounded by silence, the weight of each conversation pressing down like thick humidity in a Charleston summer. Each woman had been intelligent, capable, even kind in her own way. But none of them had asked about Lily. Not once. Not about the foundation. Not about the children. Not even about why it mattered so much to him to keep it alive. That, more than anything, stayed with him. One night, after another day spent pretending to care about contracts and concrete, he stood alone in his kitchen, pouring a glass of water. His reflection stared back at him from the window, older than he remembered, more tired than he ever admitted. He whispered to the dark, "Am I looking for a wife, or just someone willing to sign a piece of paper?" He hated the answer that echoed back in his mind. Mary Ellison had never made a scene in her life. She arrived at work 15 minutes early, every morning, without fail. Her desk was always organized, her cardigan sleeves pulled neatly to her wrists. She spoke only when spoken to, rarely offered an opinion unless asked, and somehow managed to know exactly when Harold needed his coffee refilled without him ever needing to ask. She had worked at Pierce & Sons for 5 years. In that time, she had seen Harold Pierce at his best sharp, ambitious, decisive, and at his worst quiet, broken, and unreachable. She had watched from her desk as the man who once ran board meetings like a general started sitting alone in his office for hours, staring at the same photo frame. Mary knew what was in the frame. Everyone did. Lily. The little girl who used to stop by the office after school with a backpack full of crayons and an endless stream of questions. Mary had met her a few times, polite, thoughtful, a bit shy but always cheerful. She would sit at the extra desk in Harold's office and draw for hours, humming softly to herself. Sometimes she brought Mary cookies wrapped in paper towels. When the accident happened, the whole building felt it. Harold didn't come in for 2 weeks. When he returned, he was thinner, quieter. He walked differently, sat differently. He stopped using the conference room and rarely spoke in meetings. His wedding ring disappeared shortly after. Mary never asked about Lily. She didn't have to. Grief had a way of filling a room without sound. Still, she stayed, took on more work without being asked, fielded calls, wrote polite declines to event invitations, and every so often, when Harold stepped out for lunch or a call, she would quietly step into his office and dust the small desk where Lily used to sit. She never told anyone she kept the girls' last few drawings left behind in the chaos of that spring, folded neatly in a file marked miscellaneous. They sat in the bottom drawer of Mary's desk, under extra printer paper and blank forms. She looked at them sometimes when no one was around. One was a drawing of a house with big windows and flower boxes, a garden with a swing set, a sign over the front door that read, "Welcome home." In the corner, Lily had drawn herself and a row of other children, all holding hands, each one with a smile. Mary had never shown that drawing to Harold. She wasn't sure he could bear it, but it was that picture that made her stay long after most would have found another job. She wasn't there for the paycheck or the company. She was there because she understood something about loss that most people didn't. She had lived it years ago in her mid-20s. Mary had been engaged. His name was Daniel. They had grown up together, started planning their future with sticky notes on the fridge and dreams about moving to the mountains. He was hit by a drunk driver on his way home from work. She got the call on a Tuesday afternoon. The grief was different from Harold's, but it rhymed. For months, Mary didn't speak to anyone outside of work. She stopped going to church, stopped answering calls. Life narrowed into routines that didn't ask her to feel too much, but over time, the silence inside her turned into something else, not anger, not despair, just a stillness, a quiet kind of loyalty to what had been. That's what she recognized in Harold when he came back after Lily's funeral. The stillness. Mary never expected him to notice her beyond what her role required. And he didn't. Not for years, but she didn't mind. She didn't want anything from him. Only once, when she overheard him on the phone speaking about Lily's Hope Foundation, did she feel something stir. That night, she took out the old drawings and looked at them again. Then, without telling anyone, she started drafting an internal memo, some thoughts, ideas, and contacts for nonprofits. It wasn't part of her job. She didn't plan to send it. She just needed to write it down, in case someone ever asked. No one did. So she kept it in a folder marked pending and went on typing meeting minutes and scheduling site visits. But every once in a while, when Harold passed by her desk on his way out, she looked up from her screen and wondered if he ever really saw her. The office was unusually quiet that Thursday afternoon. Rain tapped gently against the windows, soft and rhythmic, as if the sky itself was taking a breath. Harold sat alone at the conference table, surrounded by folders stacked high, donation reports, planning documents, grant drafts, all for Lily's Hope Foundation. He hadn't planned to be there, but a canceled board meeting gave him time to sort through paperwork that had piled up over the past month. He moved mechanically, flipping through files, checking signatures, noting figures until a slender cream-colored folder slid free from beneath a pile and landed near his hand. There was no label on the tab, no department stamp, just one paperclip holding several handwritten pages together, folded with care. He opened it. At first, he thought it was just old notes from a previous fundraising meeting. But the handwriting wasn't his, or any board member's. It was delicate, rounded, familiar in a way he couldn't quite place until he reached the second page and saw the name at the bottom. Mary Ellison. He blinked, then sat back, scanning the first few lines again. It wasn't just notes. It was a proposal. A carefully written plan to expand Lily's Hope through small community events, starting with local schools, then churches, then veterans organizations. It outlined potential sponsors, child-focused grant sources, and included gentle, empathetic language for press releases. The tone wasn't corporate. It was warm, hopeful, human. Each paragraph felt like it had been written by someone who understood. Harold turned to the last page. And there, just below the final paragraph, was a single line written in smaller handwriting, almost like a personal thought that hadn't meant to be read. If it were me, I'd start with the towns Lily dreamed about, the one she circled in the atlas on her desk. His breath caught. He remembered that atlas. It was worn and taped along the spine. Lily used to flip through it on rainy afternoons, circling towns she liked the names of Hopewell, Harmony, Eden, places she said sounded like kindness. She once said to him, "Maybe one day we'll build houses there too." Daddy. He had forgotten, or maybe buried it. He sat in stillness for a long time. The letter trembled slightly in his hands. All this time, while he had been scheduling meetings, drafting legal workarounds, chasing names from his past, Mary had already begun. quietly, alone, without being asked. She hadn't brought it up, never once mentioned it. No reminders, no follow-ups. Just tucked it into a folder and returned to her desk, as if the act of caring was enough on its own. Harold folded the papers carefully and placed them back on the table. His mind was loud now, thoughts spinning, fragments surfacing. Elizabeth had spoken with compassion, but left with her own life intact. Candace saw opportunity, but not purpose. Trina had offered him publicity, but not presence. And Mary had offered nothing. But she had already given everything. How long had it been there? That file, those pages. How long had she been watching him grieve without asking for acknowledgement, without needing thanks? "Have I been so busy looking far ahead," he murmured, "that I couldn't see what was right in front of me?" The rain had stopped. He hadn't noticed. He rose from the chair, walked slowly to the window. Charleston's skyline shimmered under the wet clouds, the church steeples and faded rooftops still and dignified. Harold thought of Lily's drawings, the paper flowers, the floor plans, the imaginary gardens, and how Mary had carefully saved them, preserved them like something sacred. And now this, not just a plan, not just a suggestion, but a sign that someone else had believed in Lily, too. In the quiet hallway outside his office, Harold passed by Mary's desk. She wasn't there. It was late, but the lamp she always used was still glowing, casting a gentle warmth across the workspace. He looked down. A small ceramic cup sat at the edge of her desk, filled with colored pencils. A leftover from Lily, perhaps. Or maybe something Mary had placed there to remember. He didn't know. But what he did know certainly was this. Not everyone had to shout to be heard. Some people whispered, and left echoes that stayed longer than sound. The rooftop of the Pierce & Sons building wasn't grand, just a flat stretch of concrete surrounded by an old wrought iron railing and a few potted plants left to fend for themselves. But it offered a view of Charleston that few people saw: the soft roll of the Ashley River, the moss-draped rooftops of the historic district, the slow, sleepy charm of a city that had learned to carry its scars with grace. Harold stood near the edge, hands in his pockets, his coat tugging slightly in the breeze. The sun was low, casting long shadows and brushing the sky with gold. Behind him, the elevator door slid open with a soft chime. He didn't turn right away. He knew it was Mary. "Thanks for coming," he said quietly, his voice barely louder than the wind. Mary stepped closer, her heels soft against the stone. "You sounded different. I thought it might be important." He gave a slow nod, then gestured toward the view. "You ever come up here?" She smiled faintly. "Only once." "When the coffee machine exploded and I needed air..." Harold let out a small laugh, gentle, surprised at itself. They stood in silence for a while, the kind that didn't need filling. Only when the light began to shift and the streets below began to twinkle did he speak again. "I found your proposal," he said, "the one about Lily's hope. Mary didn't react right away. I didn't think you'd see it. I almost didn't." He said, "It was buried under a pile of things that didn't matter nearly as much." He turned to face her, really face her this time. His expression wasn't cold, or calculating, or even guarded. It was tired, open, like someone finally putting down a heavy box after carrying it too long. "Why didn't you say anything?" She hesitated, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I wasn't sure it was my place," she said, "and I thought, if you wanted help, you'd ask." "I didn't think to," Harold said. "I didn't think of you at all." He winced slightly at his own words, but Mary didn't flinch. She simply nodded. "That's okay," she said. "I wasn't trying to be noticed." Another pause. Then Harold exhaled, long and slow. "There's something I haven't told anyone about the foundation, about my father's will." Mary listened. He told her everything. The clause, the deadline, the absurd condition that required him to be married before turning 50, or else lose control not just of the company, but of the very thing he'd built in Lily's name. "I've spoken to lawyers, looked into loopholes. I even met with 3 women I thought might agree to it," he said, "not because I loved them, just because I had to." Mary's voice was soft, and they all said no, in their own ways. "And now, I'm running out of time." She nodded slowly, then looked out at the river. Harold followed her gaze, wondering what she saw. "I know what it's like," she said quietly, "to lose someone and feel like you stopped existing after." He didn't respond, but she continued. "His name was Daniel. We were engaged. He was hit by a drunk driver. I was 26. Harold's brow furrowed. "I didn't know. I didn't talk about it," she said. "For a long time, I couldn't. Everything after that felt muted, like the world went on playing music, but I couldn't hear it anymore." She paused, then added, "When you lost Lily, I saw that same silence in you." Harold's throat tightened. "I never let myself grieve properly," he said. "I thought building something would fix it, that if I worked hard enough, moved fast enough, I wouldn't have to sit in it." Mary turned to him. Her eyes were steady. "But you can't outrun grief. It waits." He nodded, slowly. She stepped a little closer. "But you can carry it with someone else. That part, I learned." They stood close now, the wind cooler, but not cold. Harold looked at her, really looked. The quiet strength, the scars she didn't show, the loyalty she'd never asked to be thanked for. "I didn't bring you up here to ask for anything," he said, "but when I read your note, it felt like the first real thing I've seen in months." Mary's voice was barely above a whisper. "Lily was special, even in those short visits. I kept her drawings because they felt like hope." Harold's eyes dropped. He swallowed. "I need someone to stand beside me, not for the paperwork, for the promise." He didn't say the words, not yet, but they hung there, unspoken. And Mary, for the first time in 5 years, let herself look back at him not as her boss, not as a man broken by grief, but as someone who had tried, in his own way, to keep a child's dream alive. "I know what Lily wanted," she said softly, "and if you're still trying to make it real, maybe I can help." They stood in the quiet of the rooftop, neither moving nor speaking. The city below hummed softly, distant and unaware. The last of the golden sunlight had faded, and the sky above Charleston now carried a gentle hush, as if holding its breath for what was about to be said. Harold's hands were folded in front of him. He looked down at them, then at Mary, who was waiting, not expectantly, just patiently, the way someone waits not for an answer but for a truth. He took a breath. "I've spent the past few weeks chasing names," he said, trying to make something fit that never should have. Mary didn't interrupt. "I talked to people I once cared about. Others I barely knew. Every conversation felt hollow, because I wasn't asking them to love me. I was asking them to help me keep a promise I made to a little girl who isn't here anymore." His voice cracked slightly, but he steadied it. "I'm not looking for a wife, Mary, not in the way people mean it. I'm looking for someone I can trust, someone who sees Lily's dream the way I do, and wants to carry it forward." He paused. I need someone who doesn't just believe in the work, someone who understands why it matters in the first place. Mary looked at him for a long time. Her eyes didn't widen. Her face didn't flinch. Instead, she took in every word with the calm of someone who had already heard them long before they were spoken. Then she said quietly, "If you're asking for a signature, I can't do that." Harold's heart sank, not from rejection, but from fear that he'd misread what he thought he saw. But she continued, her voice stronger this time. "But if what you're asking is for someone to live this, to believe in it, fight for it, carry it with you, then yes." There was no hesitation, no drama, no deal, just a quiet certainty that settled in the air between them. He looked at her, this woman who had stayed through the storms, who had swept up the pieces without being asked, who had saved the drawings of a child that wasn't hers. And now, here she was, agreeing to become the keeper of that child's dream. She stepped closer. "I didn't think I'd ever be part of something again," she said, "but this feels like something real, even if no one understands it but us." He nodded. Words felt too small for what he wanted to say. Gratitude, relief, maybe even peace. Mary glanced out toward the river, the lights of the city reflecting off the water. Then she looked back at him. "Tell me what you need," she said. "We'll figure the rest out." He smiled, not a wide smile, but one that started in the eyes. "I just need you to stand beside me." She didn't say yes again. She didn't have to. Instead, she gave a small nod. Simple. Steady. But Harold felt the weight of it, as if the whole rooftop shifted beneath them. It wasn't just agreement. It was a promise. A promise to Lily, to the foundation, to him, and maybe even to herself. They stood there a moment longer, wrapped in the kind of silence that only comes when two people recognize the depth of what's just been exchanged. Not a love story, but a story of trust, of shared pain, of something sacred being passed from one pair of hands to another. As they turned to leave, Harold opened the rooftop door for her. She paused just before stepping inside and said over her shoulder, "We should probably start with Hopewell." He blinked. What Mary smiled. It was one of the towns Lily circled in her atlas. The name stuck with me. He nodded slowly, his throat tight. "Hopewell," he repeated. "Yeah, that sounds about right." The chapel was small, just a weathered wooden structure tucked beside a quiet lake outside Charleston, where Spanish moss hung from the trees like silver lace. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth. A gentle breeze stirred the surface of the water, and the sky above was soft with early autumn clouds. There were no elaborate decorations, no string quartet, no camera crew, no champagne toasts, only a few rows of wooden benches, only a handful of people, just enough to fill the space with breath, not noise. The guests were children from Lily's Hope, 4 of them, dressed in their best clothes, fidgeting nervously but smiling. 2 staff members from the foundation sat behind them. At the back, Miles. The attorney stood quietly with a clipboard, always practical, always discreet. And in the very center of the aisle, there was a single small chair. It was painted white. A pink ribbon was tied around its back. A name card, handwritten in soft cursive, rested gently on the seat Lily. Harold stood at the front, adjusting his collar. He wore a simple dark suit, his hair combed carefully for the first time in weeks. He didn't fidget, he didn't smile, but his eyes were softer, still tired, but not as alone. When the chapel door creaked open, everyone turned. Mary stepped in slowly. She wore a cream-colored dress, modest, elegant, nothing borrowed, nothing blue. She held a small bouquet of wildflowers, uneven, and imperfect, tied together with twine. The kind of bouquet you didn't buy, but gathered. She walked with quiet purpose, her steps steady on the old wood floor. As she reached the altar, Harold didn't extend a hand. He simply nodded, and she nodded back. The minister spoke softly. Words chosen carefully, not about love or eternity, but about purpose, about partnership, about promises. No one cried, no one clapped, but there was a stillness that wrapped around the room like something sacred. At the moment of the vows, Harold turned to her and said, "Not loudly, I promise to honor what matters, to carry her dream with you, to never let it be forgotten." Mary's voice was steady in return. "I promise to stand beside you, not because I have to, but because I believe in what we're building." When the ceremony ended, there was no music, only footsteps, only the soft shuffle of children moving forward with curious eyes. One little girl approached the white chair. She tilted her head and looked at the name tag. "Who's Lily?" she whispered to Mary. Mary knelt beside her, placing the wildflowers gently on the seat. "She's why we're here," she said, her voice so quiet it nearly dissolved into the air. Then she added, barely audible, "We're doing this for you, sweetheart." Outside the chapel, the lake shimmered under a silver sky. Harold stood alone for a moment, looking out at the water. Then Mary stepped beside him. No one said congratulations. There was no reception, but there was a sense between them, and the few who witnessed it, that something important had just begun. And for the first time in a long time, Harold felt something shift. Not a rush, not joy, but peace. The sun rose gently over the hills of Hopewell, casting soft gold across the schoolyard. The building was modest white clapboard siding, windows that gleamed in the light, and a hand-painted wooden sign above the door, Lily's Hope School. It had taken nearly a year to finish. From blueprints to zoning permits, from dust-covered classrooms to bright, open spaces filled with shelves of books and art supplies. And today, it opened its doors. Mary stood just outside the entrance, clipboard in hand, a simple dress brushing the tops of her shoes. Her hair was pulled back loosely, and her eyes scanned the courtyard with the quiet attentiveness of someone who saw more than what was in front of her. Children were arriving, dozens of them, some holding hands, others clinging to volunteers. Many wore second-hand clothes. Some had no family name to write on their welcome tags. But they walked through the gates with wide eyes and hesitant hope. A year ago, Mary would never have imagined this. Now, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Behind her, the doors creaked open, and Harold stepped out. He walked slower these days by choice, not age. A man who had stopped rushing long enough to see what truly mattered. He wore no tie, just a buttoned shirt, sleeves rolled, a soft smile playing on his face as he looked around. "You did this," he said gently. Mary shook her head. "We did." He looked at the hand-carved bench under the tree near the playground. Lily's name was etched into the wood in delicate script, surrounded by small drawings of stars and flowers. A child had already placed a daisy there. The ceremony began at 10, small and simple, just like the school. A few local leaders, teachers, volunteers. The children sat on rows of folding chairs beneath a white canvas tent. Mary stepped up to the microphone, her hand steady. "Welcome," she said, voice calm. "This isn't just a school. It's a home for those searching for belonging, a garden for dreams that might have been forgotten, but never lost." She paused, eyes scanning the crowd. This place was built in memory of a little girl named Lily, who believed every child should have a place to feel safe, loved, and seen. A few rows back, Harold looked down. His fingers gently touched the edge of the program in his lap. On the front, there was a simple drawing recreated from one of Lily's sketches. A house, a tree, and a sign that read, "Welcome home." After the speeches, the children sang. A soft, trembling chorus of young voices filled the air with "You Are My Sunshine," Lily's favorite. The tune was imperfect, sweet, and wobbly in parts, but it made several of the adults lower their eyes, blinking back tears. Harold closed his. He could almost hear Lily humming along. Then came the final part of the program. A girl no more than 9 stepped up to the microphone. Her name was Jenna, one of the first residents of Lily's Hope home. She wore a simple yellow dress, slightly too big, and held a crumpled piece of paper in both hands. She didn't look nervous, just serious. "My name is Jenna," she said. "I don't have a mommy or a daddy, but that's okay now." She looked out at the audience, straight into the light, because this place, this school, gives kids like me a chance to read, to sing, to dream again. She hesitated, then smiled a small one. "But real. And even though I don't have a family like other kids, here, I have hope. And that's kinda like having a mom." The crowd was silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Harold reached for the edge of the bench beside him and gripped it lightly. Mary, standing nearby, blinked hard once, but didn't wipe the tears. Jenna stepped down. The audience clapped, not loudly, but with heart. After the ceremony, as the children explored their new classrooms, Harold wandered into the art room. It smelled like glue and paper and new beginnings. On the far wall, there was a large corkboard with a title hand-lettered across the top. If Lily could see this, it was covered with drawings, some messy, some neat, all hopeful. Mary walked in a few moments later. "She would have loved this," Harold said, voice low. Mary nodded. "She does, outside." The children's laughter echoed off the walls, and far above the roof, where wind met sky, a single kite soared yellow and pink and scribbled with names, among them, near the tail, written in small, careful letters, Lily. The day the school's second semester began, the weather was quiet and cool. A soft drizzle brushed the windows of Mary's office as she organized lesson plans with the help of a few older students. She paused briefly, watching the rain trace slow lines down the glass. A voice behind her stirred her from the moment. "You've made it a home," Harold said gently. He stood in the doorway, older in the eyes but lighter in the shoulders. He now spent most of his days traveling between project sites, planting the seeds of Lily's hope in other forgotten corners of the state. But he always came back to Hopewell, to this place, to Mary. She smiled and motioned for him to come in. They stood in the center of the office, quiet in the way only people who truly understood each other could be. "I always thought legacy was about blood," he said, "about passing your name, your fortune, your vision, to someone who looks like you, thinks like you." He turned to the bookshelf where a small photo of Lily sat, surrounded by handmade thank you cards. But maybe it's not about that at all. Mary didn't speak. She let him find the words. Maybe it's about who shows up when the world goes quiet, who stays, who carries your dream not because they were born into it, but because they believe in it. He looked at her then, not as his secretary, not even as his wife, but as something more enduring, a quiet keeper of a promise, a mother to a dream. "Mary," he said softly, "you were never just part of Lily's story. You became the chapter she never got to write." Her eyes welled, but she blinked them back. She wasn't someone who cried easily, but his words reached places even her silence couldn't protect. He stepped forward, handed her a sealed envelope. "Board approved it this morning," he said. "You're the new executive director of Lily's Hope. Officially." Mary held the envelope without opening it. She didn't need the title, but she knew what it meant, that Harold was stepping back, that the legacy no longer needed his name to survive. As he turned to go, Harold paused one last time at the door. "She never asked to be chosen," he said, more to himself than to her. "But maybe she was always meant to be." Some legacies aren't passed down through blood but through love, presence, and quiet endurance. Harold's journey reminds us that healing doesn't always come wrapped in grand gestures or perfect plans. Sometimes it arrives slowly through shared grief, through whispered kindness, or through someone who simply chooses to stay. Mary never sought to replace what was lost. She simply offered what was left in her heart: understanding, patience, and a willingness to carry someone else's dream forward. And in doing so, she became something more than expected, a quiet guardian of hope. As we age, many of us wonder what we'll leave behind. But perhaps the more powerful question is, whose dream are we helping keep alive? You don't need to be wealthy to leave a legacy. You just need to show up for someone, for something that matters. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance is being remembered for how we made others feel seen, safe, and never alone. Thank you for spending these quiet moments with us. If this story touched your heart, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who needs it, and subscribing to our channel for more stories that heal, inspire, and connect. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. From our hearts to yours, thank you.